So let's kick it off, man. Baltimore Ravens coming off a season where they're the number one seed in the AFC, the top team in the NFL from a regular season record wise, and then they lose in the AFC Championship. A disappointing loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. Still maybe bringing up some of those questions about the Ravens and their ability to take advantage of the Lamar Jackson era and get back to the Super Bowl. But what are your thoughts on the Ravens high level here heading into 2024?
Yeah, and even how much of it is Lamar Jackson, failing to take advantage of the Lamar Jackson era, and can he win in the postseason? He's becoming one of those sort of lightning rod topics, like Dak Prescott, same thing. Like, are these guys that are regular season quarterbacks and can't get it done in the postseason? Julian Edelman on the broadcast or one of the preseason games was kind of taking that shot, right, at Lamar Jackson, that they haven't been able to get it done in crunch time, and that's something that they're going to be battling. And what's fascinating to me this offseason is that Baltimore had that really strong foundation. Everything was in place. And then they kind of, voluntarily overhauled that offensive line in a way you don't tend to see real contending teams do. There's value, there is importance to simply having continuity on the offensive line, particularly when it's pretty good. And instead, Baltimore went out there and made several moves to change the personnel along that group. And we were talking before we went on, we're still trying to work out what the starting five is going to look like. Players are moving positions, guys are starting at different spots. They're running with the first or the second team. That group is still in flux, and that's pretty unusual for, a high-level contending team this close to the season.
Yeah, I think that and then the departure of Mike McDonald and others across the organization, both front office and coaching staff, those are the biggest offseason stories for me with the Ravens. Like the O-line, I want to talk about that in a minute. But remember last year, this offense was really cooking. Lamar Jackson, of course, won the MVP, he didn't have the best statistical season relative to other MVPs, but this was a dominant team, right? When they played against good teams, they showed up and said, hey, we're the best team here in the regular season. And they did it offensively with a good offensive line, with that running game that is essentially led by Lamar Jackson, where you always have to worry about him as a threat, and then that opens things up for running backs, makes life easier for the offensive line. It might be a little bit of what Baltimore's banking on here. But they also had a nice group of pass catchers. When Mark Andrews is healthy, Isaiah Likely as another receiving threat, as the second tight end. Zay Flowers had a really nice rookie season, using him in the short area game, but also to get behind the defense. So they have a lot of options at every level of the field, but the offensive line shuffle this offseason, they traded the great Morgan Moses, for a mid-round pick to the Jets, and essentially went into the draft with question marks and said, okay, we're going to spend a second rounder on Washington tackle Roger Rosengarten, and now the pressure's on, right? It probably has to come in, step in as a rookie and play. They have some other intriguing pieces like an Andrew Voorhees or Daniel Fa'alele, who's moving from tackle to guard. But we're talking Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, Tyler Linderbaum at center. Those guys are locked in, but Ronnie Stanley's been battling injuries these last few years as well. Maybe throw Patrick McCarry in there. He could be a 5-position player, and he'll plug into where they need him. But we're talking 2.5 starters returning, really, here for the Ravens. That is risky heading into the season.
Yeah, and as I said, not just risky, but strange, like unusual. It's not normally the kind of approach that a high-end team, a team that expects to be contending, takes over the course of an offseason. They bring in Josh Jones as well, the kind of backup left tackle. The backup left tackle only, though, which is, again, not a thing that teams love doing. We've talked before about the kind of difficulty that teams are in now, where your third tackle needs to be able to play both sides, right? He's the first guy off the bench, regardless of which side of the offensive line gets hurt. If your left tackle or your right tackle goes down, the swing tackle is the guy that comes in. Josh Jones really has only demonstrated an ability to play left tackle at a solid level in the NFL, not the right side, not guard. He might be a one-position player, but he's great insurance if you have, say, an injury-riddled left tackle like Ronnie Stanley. So this is a very unusual offensive line that the Ravens have put together to go in front of, Lamar Jackson, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and now Derrick Henry, this special, potential weapon X in the backfield that gets coupled with Lamar Jackson, which, reduce everything else down, this becomes one of the most sort of fun case studies of like Madden franchise construction that we've ever seen. Like, what would happen if you took Derrick Henry and plugged him into a backfield where Lamar Jackson is the quarterback? Well, we're all about to find out this year.
I was asking for this a couple years ago when Henry was free, and look, I think he could still go. I mean, if you're just looking at traditional stats with Derrick Henry, lowest yards per carry of his entire career last year, and you could easily say, all right, he's 30. He's gonna, this is when running backs, I mean, they drop off at 27. 30, this dude's ancient. But Derrick Henry was still running well last year. He was running behind one of the worst run-blocking offensive lines in the league last year. He still creates after contact. He still makes people miss. And I think that the reason why this is one of those dream scenarios is the Ravens' offense last year, felt like a pitcher that has every type of pitch in his arsenal, changes speeds. You got a fastball, you have a changeup, you have a good breaking ball. The Ravens can hit you with the vertical game, the horizontal game, the QB run game, and now maybe better than ever, the downhill power game. So they have all of these options at their disposal, and I can't wait to see Derrick Henry running downhill with the threat of Lamar Jackson keeping it, and I think that will help offset some of these offensive line questions that we have here.
Yeah, I really think it's worth reinforcing the point that Derrick Henry doesn't appear to have slowed down yet. The stats say that he has, but the Titans have had the worst run-blocking offensive line in the NFL for multiple straight years now. Last season, Derrick Henry only averaged 4.2 yards per carry, but he averaged 3.3 yards per carry after contact. He still had a PFF grade of 90+. He still broke 57 tackles. Like, all the evidence says that Derrick Henry is still Derrick Henry if you can just get him more than, a yard of space with the blocking. And Henry might be a guy that needs just a little bit more room to get rumbling and make those plays. But I really believe that if you put any kind of offensive line in front of him, Derrick Henry immediately goes back to looking like, King Henry, Derrick Henry as we know him. And yeah, he's definitely reached the age where you would normally be concerned about a running back. But it's also worth pointing out that Derrick Henry has always broken the rules for running backs. Like, he is somebody who, you sort of say the cautionary tale is never chase unicorns, right? Don't go looking for a guy that's unique or different or breaks the rules. But sooner or later, one will show up, right? And at some stage, you probably have to give them credit for that and say, he's probably not going to follow the usual rules that apply to running backs because he never has. And that was true for Tom Brady as well, right? With aging. Like, at some point, you just have to accept Brady is not aging the way other people do. So let's stop anticipating it. Let's just wait until it happens. That's where I am with Derrick Henry. Like, he's well past the age where you would say, all right, let's stop expecting anything from Derrick Henry. But, like, he's always broken the rules. So Derrick Henry is Derrick Henry until I see evidence otherwise.
On the defensive side of the ball, defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, he's gone to Seattle to take the head coaching job. Since he took over the last couple of years, they had a slow start in 2022, some busted coverages, but they've been one of the better defenses in the league, especially since trading for Roquan Smith. He's back in the middle of that defense. Justin Madubuike had a breakout season last year. They re-signed him for over $24 million a year. So they're going to be stout up front again. Roquan patrol in the middle. And then I cannot rave enough about Kyle Hamilton, who just, I thought, broke out, became an absolute star last year. He had that 3-play sequence against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship that I thought summed it up, right? Blowing up plays with a blitz, blowing up a screen, making a pass deflection down the field. Kyle Hamilton becoming one of the best do-it-all safety slot players in the entire NFL right now. So I think there's plenty of star power, for the Ravens, despite the loss of Mike Macdonald.
Yeah, and I you would be concerned about losing a guy like Mike Macdonald given how important his scheme, his system appears to have been to that defense over the last few years. I like that they've promoted from within, Zach Orr to take a former Ravens linebacker stepping up to fill that spot. It feels like that's a good way of insulating the potential loss. They've brought someone in who understands the system, not even brought them in, like promoted them, who understands the system, who gets what they're doing, who should theoretically be able to, replicate the kind of basic steps of here's how we install, here's how we teach, here's what we do. And maybe he's not as good as Mike Macdonald. Maybe he will be, but maybe he isn't. But I think that's an easier way of doing it than going outside, bringing in somebody new who also might not be as good as Mike Macdonald, but is also bringing in the new system that also might not be as good. So I think that's the right approach Baltimore took this offseason of, yeah, this is a potential body blow. The best way we can insulate against it is promoting one of Macdonald's disciples from within and trying to keep a continuity hire that way.
A couple of my questions on the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Queen had also, had a breakout season playing next to Roquan Smith. He's off to Pittsburgh. Trenton Simpson, 2023 draft pick. He'll be in year 2. Coming out of Clemson. I think they were going to rely on him a little bit more at linebacker. He's really athletic. Probably had to polish up his game. We'll see if he did that last year, where he's more, as a playing as a backup last year. So a little bit of turnover on the defensive side of the ball. But the way I would describe Baltimore, especially in, say, PFF terms, when you looked at their starting 11, it was a sea of green. Just good, solid players across the board, with, I would say, Kyle Hamilton as a star, or Madubuike as a top-end player, or Roquan Smith. But it was really the consistency, a little bit of turnover there. Can they maintain that consistency? That's one of my questions on the defensive side. So for a team that was the best team in the NFL during the regular season, disappointing loss in the AFC Championship at home, it feels like there's, I don't know if they got better this offseason, right? Most teams come out of the offseason and they're like, hey, we definitely got better, right? We just drafted these players. We just filled some of these holes. The Ravens probably have more question marks than other contenders, but I also think the baseline was high enough that they're still going to be one of the better teams in the league. So what does the best case scenario look like here for Baltimore heading into the season?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best case scenario still involves, championship, still involves going, like Lamar Jackson proving that he isn't simply a regular season quarterback and that he can win in the postseason, like just having his better games against, because it's not like the better games also came against bad opposition, right? He beat good teams in the regular season, just not in the playoffs. So him having a couple of good games in the most important games, the divisional round, the AFC Championship game, getting to a Super Bowl, cementing a legacy. A multiple-time MVP now gets a ring, and now we're starting to talk about, Hall of Fame and all those kinds of things. That, I think, is the best-case scenario for the Ravens.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's getting over that hump. It's continuing, despite some of these question marks, to compete at the highest level of the AFC with the Chiefs and the Bills, and within the AFC North, which again I think we said is absolutely loaded. The other question I have, I think it's a pivotal season for Baltimore because of not just there's coaching staff turnover, some player turnover. There's also front office turnover, right? They lost a chunk of their front office to John Harbaugh's brother, Jim Harbaugh, out with the Chargers. So Baltimore as an organization has been incredibly consistent. They make a ton of good decisions from a team building standpoint. And even if they're not flashy, they are consistent, which is why they had that sea of green, right? Solid players across the board. So that I think that'll be just like high level and interesting story to watch for Baltimore, because I think the worst case scenario is a lot of that stuff comes back to bite, right? They've lost a lot of brain power. They've lost coaches. They've lost players, and they're relying on some younger players at some key spots. And there's a small margin for error, right? The Chiefs are the team everybody's chasing. And if you've gotten a little bit worse in a couple key areas, it might make it a little bit harder to compete with those top teams in the AFC. So worst case, they do take a step back, and I think it hurts in this AFC North that is really strong.
Yeah, there's a lot of good teams in the AFC where I think the worst case scenario is kind of the same, where they're just okay, right? And in a loaded AFC, just okay ends up missing the playoffs. But that's as bad as it gets, really, outside of the usual caveats, catastrophic injury to somebody significant. I feel like the baseline is too high for them to be bad. The worst case is, a lot of the question marks, the offensive line doesn't quite gel. Derrick Henry does hit a wall and can't, continue what we've expected from him. And it just all doesn't quite work. And Baltimore wins, 7-8 games and misses the postseason.
I think we've already spent a lot of time on the key position group. It has to be the offensive line for me. Is that what you would highlight going into the year?
It is. I think the offensive line would definitely be where I would look, and maybe the most important position for them. I'm also curious if Justin Madubuike can back up the season that he just had it was a year where, look, he had a lot of pressure, 64 pressures. He had a lot of sacks, and that's the thing that really got him the notice. But his pass rushing grade at PFF, 77.7, was good, not great. And if you were kind of looking at that profile, you would say that's a guy that's about to take a step back next year because he might not play any different. You know, if he repeats a 77 grade, it's not going to result in the number of sacks that he had last year. So he had like a career year. His reputation went through the roof. People were talking about him as an all-pro. It wasn't, I don't think it was that good. So can he do that again? Are we going to see, like, has he arrived, or was that the kind of high water mark and now statistically it's going to regress? And that, you know, it's not like it leaves them weak in the middle, but it does, like, he had a real impact last year because of all those sacks. Can he have the same kind of impact if he doesn't get those?
People hate when we bring that up. Pass rush grade, sack totals, you know, one probably tells a little bit better story. Position group wise, I just want to highlight corner as well. Marlon Humphrey has been outstanding. He's making almost $20 million a year. Battled injuries a ton over the last couple of years. Brandon Stevens kind of stepped up last year. Keeping an eye on his development. And then Nate Wiggins, their first round pick, undersized corner or slight corner with incredible athleticism. You know, already dealt with some injury issues in the preseason, but also showed his potential. So I'm just keeping an eye on that corner rotation, and if you know, Baltimore starts really looking to the future there, especially with a guy like Wiggins. Anything else on the Ravens? I can't wait to see Lamar and Derrick Henry, though. For all the questions we're asking, just putting those two in the backfield, I think, is going to be must-see TV.
No, it's exciting. I mean, like I said, that's a genuine, like, Madden move, right? You just, what if we took this crazy player and paired him with this crazy player and put him on the same team? Like, we're going to see that play out real time, and I'm excited for that as a neutral.